Hi everyone, welcome to the latest edition of the Halftime Club. So today we're looking at developing psychological skills. So hopefully we'll be covering a few areas regarding the importance of psychology within players and their development during their pathway, and also as our role as coaches in terms of how we might use psychological development to help support players. So as usual, we'll go through a workshop breakdown. So today we'll look at the following areas. So we have breaking down psychology, so what it actually means, like the definition of it, the power of psychology. So some really interesting research I'm going to share and highlight with you all regarding how psychology can really impact performance and perceptions of things. Psychology in the four corner model, psychological needs and how we can create safety with players in other areas. The 5 C's that some of you may be familiar with and some examples regarding that, as well as designing adaptive training environments to make people feel psychologically safe. And we'll look at some case study questions and finally closing the show with considerations when coaching. So as usual, we start off with a question. So use the Q&A function, the little speech bubble at the top, or the chat function, depending on what's applicable. So why might psychology be important in football? So use the Q&A function, think about your own context, your own experiences. Why might psychology be important in football? So Elliot shared around to assess the needs of each individual player and how they react to certain things. Yeah, perfect. So reactions and responses are really key. Yeah, too much emphasis on defeats. Yeah, never be too high, too low. So that can have an impact on performance. Yeah, strong link between their enjoyment, so their engagement and their confidence to play. Emotional state when playing. Yeah, how people speak with each other and communicate. Also got areas around driving our state and our behaviour. Carl's got the way you think, affects the way you play. If you feel positive, you will likely do better than if you're thinking negatively. Yeah, so very similar response here around sort of reactions, response, emotional state, the impact on performance, confidence, communication skills. So I think we're all sort of comfortable talking about some of the things that we think are necessary, which is really good. What we'll do, we'll have a little bit of a deeper dive into this as well, and hopefully give you some other things to think about. And also we'll give you some applicable examples that you can use in your own setting later. So thanks for that, everyone. So if we broke down psychology and we got the definition from the Oxford Dictionary, this would be the definition here. So it's the scientific study of the human mind and its functions, especially those affecting behaviour in a given context. So some key words here I'm going to pull out. So we've got scientific, we've got the mind and its functions, we've got behaviour, and we've got context. And what I want to reiterate here is none of us, or very unlikely that any of us are formal psychologists, but and nor am I. But what we have to consider here is a lot of what we might do actually might fall into some psychological practice that people might do in a more formal setting. But we are not formal psychologists, and we might not have a name for what we do either. And hopefully, what we'll do today is we'll highlight some of the important things that we already do, and also highlight some other areas that might be important to support player development. So I think the key word here is context. So if we speak about behaviour, behaviour is contextual. So behaviour might change in different settings. So we all know we've got certain people and family members that might change the way they act, depending on who they're around. You might act differently in work compared to how you might act in sports. So context is really key, and I want to really drive that as a key point throughout the workshop today. So if you had to break down psychology from a sort of football perspective, there's lots of things to talk about. So I'm just going to a couple of things on the screen just to go through. So first of all, it's a social sport. It's an invasion game. There's opponents, there's teammates. it requires communication. Always, it's things that our emotional state is interacting with other people. So 22 players on the pitch, all interacting, especially at 11 aside. And it's also really deeply cultural. So depending on the country you're from or the area, you'll have certain beliefs and values of how the game should be played, and that then affects the way people behave and the way that people act. Players also have to contend with their own emotions as well as others. Now, below at the page, we've got a little Venn diagram here of home, football, school, and work. And the players are consistently contending with a balance and blend between these three things. And there's probably more than this. This is by no means exhaustive, but it just highlights that psychological state doesn't just happen within football, it happens with things which are external influences as well. And some players will hold natural behavioural tendencies. So some will attach value to certain aspects of life and certain things. So some that might be monetary, some might be reward and that sort of basis. Some of it might be helping others, social benefit, social reward, etc. And all this, will be impacted on through their interactions with key attachment figures in their life. So that could be their parents, could be their coach, could be their peers, it could be brothers and sisters, siblings, etc., etc. So there's so much stuff that underpins why people act the way they do. And what we can't do is narrow it down to very specific points, because actually what we need to do is broaden our view on the world, and that may give us an insight into actually why people may act the way they do. So there's a whole lot to contend with. And not only that, the things they contend with can be based on historical experiences, it can be based on the moment in the present, and it can actually be based on the perception of things that may be coming in the future. So all these things are coming together to contend. And again, this is by no means exhaustive, but there's a lot to think about. So what I'm now going to do on the next page is I'm going to highlight some really interesting bits of research that may get you to think of psychology in a slightly different way. So there's been some really interesting research related to the area of psychology within sport. And I'm just going to take three things that hopefully just a little light bulb moment goes off and it really makes you think. So there's something called choking in sport. Now, that's not necessarily eating the football and choking on it. What that means is it's a symptom of anxiety. And what happens is it means when players focus excessively on the execution of a skill rather than allowing them to flow automatically without conscious effort. So what we mean by that is it might be the player that thinks about how they strike a ball, they think about each stage meticulously, and actually what evidence has showed is it actually can affect the automaticity of their performance and the execution of that skill. So we have to be really conscious of giving too many rules and too much instruction to players, because actually it can hinder performance. The next one's a perception of slant. This is really weird. So it's not necessarily sports specific in terms of football, but we'll go into in terms of how it might relate in a moment. So they did a study. They got people to perceive the slant or the incline or decline of a hill. Now, when people become more tired, the slant appeared to increase. However, when they actually measured it with their hands, so this was perceptual sort of interpretation of it versus an actual one, their hand movement never changed. So they got the slant correct by their hand movement in terms of, imagine you've got a platform that's flat and you get to tilt it left and right or up and down, but their perception of the hill was that it was a higher increase in the slant, which made it perceive them to make it harder for them to climb up it. So really interesting, really weird at the same time, but it just highlights how things can impact performance. So the more fatigued you are, probably the less likely you are to do certain things on the pitch. Now that might sound obvious, but if we think about it on a deeper level, certain players that may be like dribbling through gaps might not then perceive that gap to be to have the opportunity to dribble through again because they're more tired. Vice versa, if they're fresh and they're not as tired, they may perceive that gap as drivable through. So again, it really creates an impact here, or like an overview of how different things can have an effect. Now, finally, this is really interesting. Goalkeepers' kit colour. Players facing red-clad goalkeepers scored on fewer penalty kicks than those facing either blue or green-clad goalkeepers. So these findings indicate, so it's not necessarily like an exact answer, by the way. What I don't expect you to do is go and buy loads of red kit for your players. But the findings indicate that athletes or players wearing red may have an advantage over their opponents. So it's really interesting how there's a lot of other stuff that actually we probably don't need to know the details behind why they happen the way they do. But what I'm trying to highlight is psychology is really powerful, and it can impact how we perceive things. It can impact what we actually do and how we act. It can also impact our performance levels. So the brain and the mind and all these elements are really, really powerful. And I mean, if I had to sum this page up in an emoji, this is the one I'd pick. It's definitely food for thought. But again, there's so much stuff out there in psychology, beyond the scope of one webinar within an hour. But hopefully, this gives you a really interesting overview of the different things you can think about. So we're now going to lead on to a question. So can you think of any other examples where you think psychology may have a positive or negative impact on performance? So think about, like, we got the choking in sport as an example. Can you think of things in your experience or in your past where you've gone, when someone told me that, I actually felt that made me worse, or I felt that made me better, or when I played against this in this situation, I feel that made me worse, I feel that made me better. So yeah, have a little go and see if you can input some stuff on the chat or the Q&A function. So Piers is speaking about a purple patch. When someone gives you trust, your form tends to improve a lot. So it's like that safety, isn't it? Go on, do it. You're doing well. Teacher saying he wasn't very good at maths, so you believed him, yeah? Because again, they're a key attachment figure in your life. You believe that what they say is true, and it actually might have an impact on actually where you go and how you revise, how you study. David said around criticism and encouragement from coaches. Yeah, agreed. Let's have a look on the Q&A. Yeah, not being afraid to foul. So that can be really beneficial for people. So I'm not going to pick up every mistake you do, because if you give them that freedom, that comfort zone to go and do stuff, they're more likely to give it a go. Yeah, Mark said about thinking too much about the opposition. Again, so it's bringing that stuff into conscious thought too much. If we give them too much to think about, they may choke. Again, not literally, but based on the psychological example we used before. Jack said about managing difference between players, maybe putting pressure on certain players. They may not like it, not putting pressure on players that respond well to it. Let's have a look what else we've got here. Telling a player or team they can't do that, or if a player system that they can't use their weak foot. Yeah, and can't's a dangerous word. Don't do this and don't do that. You got to be very careful, because you straight away limit behaviour. Daniel shared about the catastrophe theory. Yeah, became more aware of when I was having a bad game. Once understood properly, I was able to put past mistakes to the back of my mind rather than dwelling 100%. We'll speak about some examples like that later as well. Yep, delivery of feedback, not constructive. Starting as a sub every week, it's really important that as well. We can call people starters and finishers and game changers and that, but the reality is players know what a substitute's bench is. Okay, what we have to do is ensure that their understanding of why they're on there is appropriate, it's fair, and it's based on the needs of the players. It isn't based on your own. So just think about whose needs are you meeting. Yeah, players struggling to score goals becoming a mental problem, and I think that's really key as well when you think about positions on the pitch. A striker is judged on the amount of goals they score. A goalkeeper is judged on the amount of goals they don't concede. Other parts of the pitch, you may not have that much pressure. So there's certain positions on the pitch which are likely probably to increase in pressure or increase the pressure on players. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Some really good stuff there. So what we're going to do now is, and I think what's really important is tying this back into the four corner model. And the reason why we think this is important is because what we're now trying to say is, well, we quite clearly know that the psychological and the social area together are probably really key drivers to technical, tactical, and physical performance. Because if I don't believe I can do something, I don't feel safe, I don't feel confident, etc., it's probably going to have a negative impact on the other stuff. And then if I am then judging players on the technical, tactical, but I'm not taking into consideration the psychological and social state of them individuals, I'm probably missing a trick. So we have to try and understand and look for patterns of behavior and any changes in patterns of behavior that may give us a little bit of an insight into what might be going on. But remember, we're not formal psychologists. We can't read minds. But what we've probably got to do is dig a little bit deeper. And the four corner model encompasses this. It just says to you there's probably lots of different things to consider that come together to form behavior and actions. So we're now going to look at psychological needs, and I'm going to share you a bit of research called self-determination theory, and some of you may be familiar with this, and we'll just go through it step by step. So self-determination theory, it theorizes that social context, that's who you interact with, your surroundings, may support or thwart human function, so how we act and what we do, based on the social environment's ability to satisfy the participants' basic psychological needs. So there's quite a lot there. So if we just break that down first of all, so what it's saying is the environment in which I inhabit and I exist within can either support me or hinder me and my behaviours and actions, depending on the opportunities that exist within that environment that support my needs, my basic psychological needs as a person. Okay, and there's three main areas of this. So there's the feeling of competence. So it's that feeling efficacious. So it's that ability that I can actually do this task, for example. And if I feel competent, that meets a psychological need in myself, and I'm more likely to then have a higher performance if related back to football. Autonomy, the ability to be oneself and to be in control of my decisions and self. Again, so just think about if I feel autonomous as an individual, I feel a lot more comfortable. I feel like the world is my oyster sort of stuff. If I don't feel in control of oneself, I'm probably looking at other people to help me navigate my life. And actually, what I need to do is to bring it back to me. So it's a basic psychological need. And this idea of relatedness, to feel connected, to feel as one, as member of something. When we think back to football, that's really key, to feel part of a team. If you don't feel you're part of a group or an individual, it can be quite lonely. And again, these are some really basic psychological needs. And I guess what self-determination theory asks us to do is consider, are we as coaches getting our players to experience these things? And if we aren't, we probably are missing a trick. So we need to, maybe have a little reflection and think, well, what can I do better to make players feel competent at what they do and how they do it? Do they feel they're actually in control of what they're doing and they're allowed to be themselves? And also, do they feel as part of a team and feel connected to them, to us or their teammates? So I think it's a really important and a really simple theory, I think, once you break it down. So this sort of then leads into the 5 Cs. And again, some of you may be familiar with this, but we won't dive into it straight away. But the first question I'm going to ask is, what psychological qualities and skills would you want your players to have nurtured in 10 years' time? Now, if you're working with young players, obviously you may still be with them in 10 years. If you're working with older players in open age, for example, that might be things you want them to have as an adult going into the wider world. So use the Q&A function or the chat function and just think about what psychological qualities and skills would you want your players to have nurtured in 10 years' time. So Mark shared around resilience, self-belief, contentment. Got resilience and grit has just come up as well. Self-belief, the ability to work with others, yeah. The ability to emphasize with others too, yeah. Empathy is really key. Yeah, resilience come up again. Positive attitude, not afraid to fail. Yeah, things what are in their control, what aren't in their control. Believe in themselves and their ability. It links into that feeling of competence. We go back to self-determination theory. Resilience and grit, yep. Coping with losses better, yeah. So when things aren't going well, How do we navigate that? It can never be too high or too low. Self-control and patience, become less frustrated over minor things. Discipline, determination. Good word, Richard, bounce back ability. So when you have them little peaks and troughs in your life or in general, how do you bounce back? Daniel shared quite a few, so positivity, self-belief, not scared of failure, desire to learn, desire to succeed, accepting mistakes. Respect for others. Empathy. So very similar again. And I think what I want to get across as well here before we dive into actually breaking down the 5 C's is quite often you see things nowadays where a poster's put on the wall and you say these are the traits we're looking for: resilience, empathy, etc., etc. But what they don't do is explain how to get there. Words by themselves are simply words. What we need to do as coaches is have a better understanding of how to actually get there. And to relate it to football, that's like saying to a player, hey, you need to be better at passing, but you never actually go and help them. You just tell them and you think that's enough to help them get better. It's the same with saying you don't work hard enough, or why are you looking down, head up. What does head up actually mean? So what we're going to break down is actually have some real examples and some interventions that will actually help you not just say stuff, but actually have the depth of detail to then provide them the necessary information to get there. So what we don't want to do is just simply list things now. We actually want to understand how to do it. So the 5 C's. So for a bit of additional context, the 5 C's were created by Professor Chris Harwood. I think he was at Loughborough University at the time, and it's been integrated within the National Player Development Strategy for all England teams since 2014. It's also had a large influence on educational policy against many organisations, and it's a really simple tool, again, to think about how we can support players in our care. So the 5 C's are: one of them's confidence, commitment, control, concentration, and communication. So we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these, and we're going to give some really clear examples. So confidence. So, an example might be actually using a player's first name when giving praise and specific feedback on individual accomplishment. So, well done, Johnny. Well done, Sarah. Rather than just say it randomly to anyone, be really specific, and that builds confidence because they know it's about them, and also they know that other players know it's about them, and it makes them feel competent. It makes them feel like self-belief increases. So think about using first names explicitly when you provide feedback or any information. So work with players directly, which probably a lot of people do already. So some of this we do already. We're just formalising it a bit more. Work with them to apply individual goals where applicable and where possible, and progressively build this up. So think about personal bests and self-set targets that all players respect, value, and strive to achieve. And I think with confidence as well, when we speak about targets, quite often when we do competition, sometimes we do it in relation to the rest of the group. But if an individual is struggling to do something, they're not competent or don't feel competent at a certain action, actually that can be quite detrimental. Because if they feel as if they're never going to get better because they're always judging their own ability based on what others can do, you may be missing a trick. So personal bests are a good way to separate them from others and what their targets are and make it more about them, which then builds and drives confidence. We could also try and get players to imagine what a confident player looks like. So, a confident player, they make brave decisions, they show a positive physical presence on the pitch, they run around, movement, etc. And if you keep reinforcing this model, you're more likely to build up a picture of what a confident player looks like. And also then it allows you as a coach to then have a look against that and see what areas they may need more support with. So really drive home that mental imagery around what a confident player probably looks like and how they act. We might also offer players the ability to do practices they enjoy, which may give them opportunity to build a competence and also hone their strengths. So sometimes there may be practices that we think are not realistic or we think that aren't going to necessarily transfer, etc., etc. But we have to understand that sometimes players might just want to do something to feel good. And I give an example regarding finishing. We know that in finishing practices, majority of them are delivered unopposed. In reality, in the game, most strikers are outnumbered in defence, and there's obviously a lot less space in comparison to other parts of the pitch. However, If a striker hasn't been scoring goals recently, you may want to do an unopposed practice where they literally are just hitting the back of the net constantly because you're trying to build confidence. It doesn't mean, by the way, that you then can't scale up again and go back into that more realistic environment to work at finishing. But what you're trying to do is just get them on that first bit of their journey and say, look, let's just get you having that feel where players speak about feel hitting the back of the net. So again, it's not a right or wrong, but it's just things to consider. So commitment. So reward a player's efforts, attitudes, and intentions beyond merely the execution or the outcome. So I love the way you tried this today, Johnny. I love the way you tried this way, Sarah. That was good because you did this, and be really specific. And we spoke about giving that a go. I really appreciate you giving it your best shot. And then that will drive that commitment from them. Again, make it personalized, be really specific. Encourage use of individually chosen goals and targets. I'm more likely to be committed if I've agreed a target and a goal and I feel that I can actually achieve it. Encourage persistence after mistakes and create a no limits environment. I often hear a quote saying our job is to make players feel that their ability is limitless, and obviously we can't take it, exact, but if we take it at, face value a little bit, a pinch of salt, what it does say is, we want mistakes because that's how learning happens. And again, they're then committed to you as a coach because they feel safe in your care. Offer positive reinforcement and recognition when extra effort led to. So if you see it a bit more, you might want to really make and highlight that again because it makes other players as well feel like I want a bit of that. And get people to rate their performance, rate their commitment levels. Can the squad raise it one notch in the next 5 minutes? And if you have a shared understanding of what the levels look like, they're more likely to understand what is required to get to that next notch. Control. So show players the difference between negative and positive emotional reactions. So illustrate the effects of anger, self-criticism, poor body language, and negative thinking on the pitch. Don't just tell them it's poor body language. Highlight to them the consequence of that. Highlight to them the effect, the impact it may have on A, B, or C, or D. So if a player's head drops, they may miss an opportunity to get back on the ball again. If they make a run and they don't get the ball, they need to realise they may have opened up space for someone else. If they stop running again, the impact is that other person that doesn't get on the ball. So you're just building that ability to control emotions. So things that are in their control and things that aren't. Encourage players to detach themselves from mistakes and negativity by using immediate refocusing triggers. So what we mean by that is when you say like, come on, what's next? Okay, well, let's get back on it now. They are triggers, but again, you have to support them what that actually looks like, but it allows you as a coach on the sideline to use minimal language, but with maximum effect. And what you're saying is, right, so for example, when the ball goes off the pitch and it goes dead, people say, don't turn your back. But again, explain why. And these trigger words are important because they get players focused quickly and everyone has a shared understanding of what they mean. And you'll have your own language in your own setting. You simulated pressure in games and practices to train positive responses to adversity. So deliberately officiate badly, deliberately create score lines which put one team at disadvantage compared to others, or different time pressure, and administer consequences for poor self-control and discipline. But remember, you must also then help them. Don't just put on a practice and make it increase adversity for them without having a support mechanism in place when they can't handle it. Because there will be a moment when they don't know what to do with their emotions. So is there that safe space for them to then come off the pitch or the practice to have a conversation, to regulate their emotions and breathe? So just think about it. If I'm going to put adversity on them, am I prepared to support them through that? Because if I'm not, again, you're probably missing a trick. And reinforce the use of mental routines, pre-game breaks, plays. If players can breathe and they can visualize and they know what's coming, they can feel more competent and confident and feel under more control. Concentration. So highlight the correct cues that a player should be focusing on. So it might be, again, trigger words. It might be like, when the ball's on this side, can you look over there? And it just gets them to concentrate on the things that they may need, even off the ball. Don't wait for it to happen. Try and coach a little bit in the future. We often, as coaches, coach in the past. So we coach once something's happened. The reality is that thing might not happen again. So try and coach in the future. That gets the players, predicting the future, what's going to happen next, and it gets them concentrating information before it happens. The best players predict the play. The worst players are the ones that react afterwards. We don't want reactive players, we want people that are proactive. So again, around trigger words, press, squeeze, and drop, which again relates to concentration. Employ practices that challenge players to scan and switch focus. So if you do practices that have only one outcome and the players know exactly where the ball's coming from, they know where it starts, they know where it ends, they know what a player's doing against them, you're probably again missing a trick in getting them to be able to switch their attention and concentration during games, because that's realistic. You're not going to be able to focus on one thing all the time. However, again, using a bit of nuance here, some players may need to focus on one or two things to start with because that's all they can handle at that moment in time. But we must then prepare them for the extra bits that come in. So again, you're missing a trick a little bit if your practices look the same, smell the same, and feel the same. And overload and stretch their concentration spans. Adding irrelevant distractions in or more players than they would have normally in a pitch, or extending practice for longer. So doing things when players are tired, like we said earlier, fatigue can have an impact on the perception of gaps, of distances, of spaces, of the ability to drive through, to pass through, to run through. How often do we do practices where the players are tired or fatigued? And we're not doing it because we want to punish them. We're doing it because we're saying, I've noticed in games towards the last 10 minutes, we struggle to keep the ball very well. So actually what you might do is then put a practice on deliberately where you purposely fatigue them in the exciting and engaging and appropriate way. And then you put on the possession bit at the end. Rather than just play a game, put on a possession practice at the final stage of your session to see what they, and go in and coach how to keep the ball under fatigue, as an example. And then communication. She might develop a specific practice that highlights the role of communication, so only two players can talk. You might have silent football. We often say, communication and talking is something that a lot of coaches throw at players. You're not talking enough. Actually, sometimes they're not actually providing enough visual cues and information to players to work from. So sometimes it might be, we're playing silent. Can you work out where you need to go next without someone telling you? It's something people might say, oh, you didn't let me know there was a player next to me. Or you didn't tell me I could turn. I don't really think that's the individual on the ball's job to rely on someone else only and explicitly to tell them when to turn. It should be a combination. So again, think about the practices you do. Okay, let's move on a bit. So yeah, recognise and reinforce when a player gives appropriate praise. So again, you're just saying, well, I love the way you spoke to that individual. I liked it because you did A, B, and C. Okay, so quite a lot there. And obviously this will be recorded and it'll be placed onto YouTube as well, so you don't have to remember this information. But hopefully it's now started getting some little light bulbs going off in our brain and what we're thinking about in terms of how we might support our own players. So the next question I'm going to ask is, can you think of any individual challenges related to the 5Cs for players to focus on in training? So in your context, can you now start to think of some challenges you may have used or you're going to start considering to use in your own context, but specifically for one person, to an individual? You don't have to name names, by the way. So just some ideas to think about and share them. Could be really good to share with the group. And we gave a little bit of context about why you're employing that challenge. Okay, so it might be, I've got a player that does this, and this is a challenge I might now give them or what I've given them in the past. So use the Q&A function or the chat function. David said about he might have tasked a player, can you communicate positively with your teammates for the whole session? Again, but make sure you explain to them what positive communication looks like and give them some examples. Richard share, have a good play on the ball, but he lacks interest in running back without it. So I've challenged to see how many times he can win the ball back within 5 seconds. So yeah, it's measurable, it's specific, and it encourages them to have more commitment, concentration as well. I've set challenge to one player to use the phrase great effort when they saw something that went well. At the end of that session, I asked the group if they noticed how it made them feel. Yes, again, like consequence is really important. So support the development of their leadership skills. Yeah. Yep, Jack should about, a player that gets stroppy. You've asked him to praise individuals in the first half. So it drags him out of that stroppiness and improves his body language. So he gets players to think about their trigger words they can communicate using the same. Yeah. Yeah, so Cole shared about that transfer between, doing drills and practices, but not necessarily transfer into games. So, like I said, about scaling up, isn't it? About scaling up. How can we do when there's lots of things now going on in the game? The ball's moving, players are moving, opposition's moving, etc., etc. Now, how do we impact that? So it's just give them that space to do it. Asking where is your player for scanning awareness during the session? Yeah, so who might be pressing you next? And that might change. Just think about, the trade-offs of saying who's your player, because it might change quite a lot in the game of football. It might not be the same person. So Daniel shared about actually, giving a player a secret mission, for example, so you don't have to announce it to the rest of the group. So that links back to that individual challenge regarding, every time he attempts to beat a player, his team get a goal. If he gets an additional goal, so it's a really nice way. Not everyone has to be aware again, because some people might not want their targets to be known by other people. It might make them feel less confident, less competent. It might make them feel a bit isolated. Might should about reward them with praise when they demonstrate the requested behaviour. Yeah, brilliant. And I think on that as well, when that behaviour becomes more consistent and it's happening more and more, then actually give them less praise, and a simple thumbs up will do, because essentially what you're saying is I'm not going to stop praising you now, because that's what we expect. And then you just move on. So just make sure we don't overpraise over too much time. Once it becomes consistent and ingrained, then change your approach. Just say, yep, cool, thumbs up. Yeah, much about not using bibs. The players have to communicate, scan more rather than glance for a colour. Yeah, lots of different ways to do it. Yeah. Okay, so just on that then, so I'm now going to slightly flip the question just a little bit, and I'll ask you to think of any paired challenges. So how might you pair players up to work on certain things? Now, these could be players that have two different things to work on, but they may actually relate to each other, or they may be players that have the same area to work on, and how they can be a supportive unit against, I guess, for each other. So just think about any paired challenges you might use, or group challenges. Yeah, David said about different cards, different brands of cards that are good for these challenges. And you can even get your players to come up with these challenges as well. And it's a really interesting way of getting them engaged in the practice and their own development. So Richard just shared about trying to challenge the goalkeeper defenders to all pass the ball between themselves at goal kicks to avoid the panic to get it out from the parents. Yes, you might group people together, have a similar thing. Just think about as well, there's probably going to be a time when to play forwards, and that again, it's just creating that safe environment, isn't it? And if the parents aren't part of that safe environment, then you need to maybe have a polite and kind conversation. And again, relate back to the consequence and impact it will have. You might pair people to, ask them to teach the other person, explain what is required, choose players to demonstrate the required traits to the coach and feedback to each other. And just be conscious that when we pair players up, try not to put someone that, is striving ahead with someone that, might be struggling at this moment in time. Because sometimes, even though you might think that would be beneficial for the person who's struggling to keep up, actually it can be really quite annoying for some people that are striving ahead because they feel they're getting restrained and pulled back. So again, you just got to get the balance right and just work out the needs of the people. And some people might be happy to support, but some others might be, I don't want to work with an individual that's going to hold me back. And we just have to understand that that's life and that happens. So again, it's just reiterating to players and that this is why we're doing it. And if you're not comfortable, you still have an opportunity to have a conversation regarding it. Let's have a look at the Q&A. Adam said about two players working close on the field to provide each other with positive support. Yeah, really good. And that could even be when you pair players up on the pitch. So for example, if you've got let's say you've got two at the back, for example, you've got two defenders, you may decide to pair someone who's really competent at covering space in behind, especially if you want the other person to practice going in and engaging the ball. So they feel confident to go and engage and practice what they need to get better at and challenge him because they know they're paired with someone else that's actually going to support them if it goes wrong. And I think that's really key. It's that supportive mechanism and blanket you're placing around people. So then very similar, sort of one aggressive defender, one less aggressive. So you got them to switch roles. So the less aggressive one becomes the more aggressive presser, and the aggressive one to be the ball player. Yeah. So again, you can just flip things. You can create different pairings and groupings to bounce off each other. So many different ways to do it. And again, hopefully, just get some little light bulbs going in terms of A, I'd confirm what you already do, or secondly, just give you some different ideas to go and give it a go. Thanks, everyone. So just moving on now. So I think the key to this, first of all, is what we do as a coach. We have to create an environment that allows players to practice these things. And I think the key word here is adaptive. We don't want to make environments that are too restrictive because then we limit the choice players have and how they interact with each other. So I'm just going to give you an example here, and this is from David Zital in 2018. And essentially it's around this idea of creating safe uncertainty. And it's the principle that safe uncertainty is probably the environment you want to create for your players to go and experiment with him. But we're also going to look at the other side of it, the things we might not want them to experience as much of. That doesn't mean there's not a place for it, but we have to be really considerate of the impact and consequence it has. So safe uncertainty would be described as positive risk taking and creativity. So it means the players are actively participating in the session, they feel comfortable trying things out and exploring and discovering new ways to play. But there's also uncertainty there. So what we mean by that is they're not doing the same thing over and over again. So we speak about commitment and concentration and control and communication, etc. If there's uncertainty in what's going to happen, we're probably actually elevating them elements more. We're asking them to be better at using them. Now, if we have safe certainty, so certainty of information, certainty of experience, players might get an autopilot, they might become bored. So if you do a lot of passing patterns and practices, but they still feel safe to get things wrong, just consider that we may be dampening the impact psychologically we want, or impacting the psychological effects we're looking for within that practice. So structure, order, and rehearsal, low engagement, and passive learning. So just think about if we find ourselves in that space more, yes, the environment's safe for them, but we probably need to mix it up a little bit. Now we start to go into unsafe. Now we never want to create an environment that's unsafe. So unsafe certainty, that means the players are pretty sure they can't make mistakes and they know exactly what has to happen, etc. And that can be toxic, it can be damaging. That's where fear gets in, that's where they feel judged and they feel critiqued. Now unsafe uncertainty is dangerous. Okay. It means that I I don't feel safe at all. Don't know what's going on, and I have no idea what's coming. And every week, every session, every practice, every game could be complete different emotional response required to deal with it. And we really don't want to end up in that space. So really want to be in the top two, but ideally the top right as much as possible. Okay, we don't want to be creating fear and judgment and creating danger and lack of safety. So just to now finish off the sort of webinar, we're going to provide 2 case studies. And again, this just gets you now to think about things in a different way, or again, highlight and share some things you already do in your practice. So case study 1. So a goalkeeper is very quiet when it comes to communicating to others. And hopefully this is a case study or brief that you might be familiar with. They often stay on their line and don't feel comfortable coming out to sweep up or support their teammates in possession. After speaking to the player, they mention that they are worried about getting lobbed if they come out too far. So considering the 5 C's, think of some challenges or practice manipulations that may support this individual, and I'll list the 5 C's here as well. Okay, so just have a little think. What challenges or practice manipulations can you do or might you do to support this example? And I'm hoping that this example again is familiar to a few of you. So use the Q&A or the chat function. So Mark shared about highlighting ideal start positions. Yep. So actually going through it and showing them this is what this is what it looks like. So making them feel competent and their understanding of what's required, and then encourage them to keep trying it. Let them fail for trial and error. But again, be ready to support them when it doesn't go well. Richard shared about the last couple of training sessions. When we finish with a game, we play without a keeper, but with a player with gloves on. So he plays out, but the only one that uses his hands. It's encouraging other players to work back when we lose the ball. Yeah, different ways. Yeah. Design match realistic sessions, yeah, to retain possession. So you might start with them, you might start quite a lot with the keeper, for example. Use unopposed practices with the goalkeeper starting well off our goal line to improve confidence and slowly introduce opposition. Yeah, again, so you're just scaling up the information. You're saying, look, let's get this bit right first. Let's get comfortable and competent with that. And then we'll add the other stuff and we'll add the communication. So it's just prioritizing things first. You can't do everything at once. Yeah, Gavin said about creating a through ball practice to help the keeper judge when and when not to sweep. I think that's really key. What you're doing there is making it really specific and you're recreating the environment they're likely to have to apply these things in. So you might be saying, look, can you judge the speed of the ball? Can you judge the bounce? If you don't think you can get there, can you recover to the goal? Can you defend the space if you think you can, etc., etc. Cole said about standing on the edge of the penalty area during the games. Yeah, they have to practice concentration to watch the flow of the match. Yeah, and only shooting the opposition you're attacking. Over time, they will learn and they won't be lobbed, etc. We'll be able to help the team. And again, that concentration, you're looking for, can you try and predict when they're going to lob you? So you're not waiting for them to hit it first. You're going, can you see if there's any clues that might give me an idea that they're going to kick it up in the air, as an example. Okay, thanks everyone. So you're probably going to still put some more stuff in there, that's fine, but I just want to move on, as conscious of time as well. We've got a second case study. So case study 2. So a team consistently struggles in competitive games. They often blame each other and find it hard to work together. They often talk with their coach about positive behaviours, but this is not having a desired impact on their performance. I think I just missed a word out there. Okay, so a lot of talk about it, but a lack of action, I think, is the key bit for that final bit. So considering the 5 C's, think of some challenges or practice manipulations that may support this team. So it's not necessarily an individual challenge now, it's a team challenge. So again, just for your So you can see there's the 5 C's there again. And also Mike just shared about telling them stories about, when it's happened to other players, like talking professional players. You can show them videos of professional players where it's happened to, just to make them feel like, okay, if it happens to them, it can happen to me. So yeah, some really good stuff. A lot of good work here. Really good. So yeah, just in this case study, this is a team interventions or practice manipulations based upon that they struggle in competitive games. They find it hard to work together and they blame each other. They often talk about what things they should be doing, but they aren't. So Carl said about maybe taking them outside the football environment, maybe try and build a team spirit away from the pitch to see if that comes back into the games. Yeah, it might be one way to do it. Brilliant. So we're thinking a bit broader than football itself. I think Clinton shared the same, take it away from football, and create transferable challenges and things that can translate across. Richard shared laser tag. So Gavin said about setting a rule that only the coach gives feedback to the players. Players don't feedback on other players. Cut down the blame culture. Perhaps set everyone an individual goal to achieve in the game to help improve performance gradually. Yes, essentially what you're doing, you're stripping back the noise. I think what you're saying there, Gavin, you're saying, right, I'm going to take control of that noise. I'm going to say when we can have that, share that, and when we can't. So you're not giving them the space to share negative feedback. But then what you're saying there is you'll then gradually build it back up over time through individual challenges or pair challenges, etc. So that might be a good way of doing it. Not saying again, no right or wrong, but I like your logic and rationale behind that. So Mike shared about, zero tolerance on negativity in training matches and have had it since under 6. It means they learn not to criticise their own players in earshot. Yeah, so again, it depends on you as a coach, what your values are and your beliefs on what behaviour you accept and don't accept. Again, this is a very broad case study, but again, I'd like to think that this happens quite a lot of places and actually the things that we might have to consider. You get that one player that struggles compared to another and that individual, gets spoken to differently, a lot firmer from their own teammates. So Adam said about plenty of team build practices like noughts and crosses. Yeah, so anything that, again, it might just simplify that ability to work together. You're getting rid of all the noise around it and you just keep it nice and simple and then building up the other parts of it. And again, it might not happen at once. It doesn't have to happen in one session. It might happen over a period of weeks, over a period of seasons. Yeah, you might bring the parents on board, etc. as well. Okay, so thanks everyone. So some really great interaction on this, by the way, and it shows a lot of good practice that's going on. And hopefully what it highlights as well, there's no right or wrong. There's just in your context, it depends. That is what it depends on. It's your context and your environment. But what we want to stay away from is poor practice, which is that unsafe uncertainty, unsafe certainty with things. Okay. So just some consideration with coaching. They very rarely change throughout the webinars. So be considerate of the impact of our language. Like I said, if we tell people to get their head up or we tell people to, oh, you should make that pass, actually add value. What do they need to do to get better at it? And hopefully that's highlighted today. And the psychological impact of words is so important. The role of the goalkeeper. So often, the goalkeeper becomes very prominent when we speak about psychological things. We think about, them scoring goals. It's one of the one positions on the pitch which is really hard to manage psychologically because if a goal goes in, you might say to them, well, it's a team game. We defend as a team, we lose the team, which is true, but they also know that they're the last person to stop goals. So we again have to prepare them with skills and attributes that we think will support them. Talking about it might not be enough. Let players explore. So if we want players to feel safe, uncertainty, we need to give them the environment to go and explore and try things. Guide their attention to recognising detail, which links into communication and competence around understanding the game and things like that. Provide encouragement. You never truly know what they've seen, so don't say to them, you should have done this, you should have done that. That makes them feel less competent. What you need to do is ask them what they saw, and if that matches up with what you noticed, and if it doesn't, that's where conversation is required. And have fun trying things out as a coach. Give these different things a go, but have an eye on the impact it has and the consequence. If you're going to give a go in terms of communication, you're going to provide some adversity in practice and training, actually begin to think about what impact does it have, and don't just put it on, cross your arms and facilitate. Go in. Your job as a coach is to support the development of people. It's not there for you to go and cross your arms and do nothing. So a workshop summary. So the impact of internal influences in terms of what goes on inside them, how they think and feel, related to the external influences, their parents, teammates, coaches, school, home life, football. Football's a social sport, so we need to remember that. It's about interacting with people, and that's really key. We should never forget that. I said we spoke about homeschool and football, that little triad. Things, historical experiences will impact what we do now, and they might not be conscious of that. Things go on the present, but also be ready to prepare them for things in the future. The power psychology, we use the examples around some of the research and really interesting sort of studies that come out regarding, psychology is really powerful. What goes on up there and goes on around our body and how it interacts together is really key. The four-corner model, hopefully, again, we've just gone a little bit more detail regarding that, and you can see now the simplicity of the four-corner model, but the depth behind it. Self-determination theory around competence, autonomy, etc. So think about them areas you want to create them environments. The 5 C's around confidence, commitment, control, concentration, and communication. Challenges that you may place, psychological ones, or that elevate that psychological side, should I say, regarding or that impact individuals or pairs or teams. And we really want to try and create a safe uncertainty in terms of our environment. Just think about if we don't want it unsafe and we don't want it too certain. We want to provide them opportunities to practice different skills that relate to the game. So thanks, everyone. So just in terms of a couple of little things, just tidy up. So we have a Your Club program that's just beginning to open up now. The application are now open, and newsletters will be sent out if you're part of our coaches newsletter. If not, please drop me an email or something, and we can add you to that coaches newsletter. So this is a bespoke program where we provide bespoke support for clubs and their needs and their requirements, and a coach developer as part of our dedicated casual team will come down and support you within that.